Chapter 61 Glory Battlefield. It's lonely at the top, Barto thought to himself, shaking his head. He sat in the passenger seat of the massive vehicle with only Van, the young driver, as his companion. From the adjacent seat, Van craned his neck toward a slim digital tablet in Barto's lap. Both shared the same nervous excitement as they viewed their friends and allies as dots advancing across the screen. Van rested his chin on his hand and drummed his fingers on his face, then looked forward, as if he were going to put the vehicle in gear and drive to their rescue. Every minute or so, he would change positions in his seat, then look back at the tablet, only to look away again a few moments later, always afraid to see one of the blue dots stop moving. Barto remained still, but was very aware of the dryness in his own throat and the throbbing of his heart. His aching fingers reminded him how tightly he was gripping the tablet. As a young man, Barto had visited the replica Transamerica Pyramid in its heyday. He could still picture the decadent fountains and shops of the ground floor nestled between the crisscrossing beams that formed the X's around the perimeter of its interior. He would strain his neck skyward and marvel at the view of the upper floors. They appeared as squares within squares, ever shrinking until they converged at one of the higher floors. Truly majestic. Now those days were gone. The fountains had gone dry. The progressive three-dimensional art sold off. The shops shuttered, looted, and defiled by homeless hijinks. Today, its wicked emptiness held only memories and echoes of its glorious past. And now, it's a battlefield. I hope our people are all right. Barto tried his best to ignore Van's squirming. He knew how to deal with his own jumpiness, but found managing their combined anxiety a nearly impossible task. Then he heard music. The melody sounded familiar, but he could not recognize it. Reluctantly, he diverted his attention from the still-moving blue dots on the screen and asked Van, "What is that song?" Van held his device on his right thigh. It bounced while he tapped his foot on the floor of the van, discharging his jitters. "Oh, it's from an old Chinese drama I watched recently, King's Avatar," he said. The words tumbled out of his mouth. Barto maintained his eyes on the tablet, but nodded his head, still listening. "It's the theme song called 荣耀的战场," Van said, using torpid Chinese. "It means glorious battlefield in Mandarin. My bad. I'm just really nervous and scared for everyone. Music helps calm me down. I can turn it off if it's bothering you." His quick speaking had left him winded. Barto, eyes still locked on the tablet, reached over and patted the young man's shoulder with enough force to make him wince. "I'm scared too. I know this song. It's been a long time since I've heard it though." There was a pause in his words. It looked as if something had happened under the tablet. "You want me to turn it off?" Barto shook his head emphatically. "Turn it up." The resistance against him was heavy. Cheeks, Spazer, and Bear led the charge. Jinhua and Daniel followed closely behind. That left Noe and Lee to watch the rear of the battle formation, as the 7 of them encountered an unknown number of Limnic humans and Meganoid units. Explosions, conventional munitions, and laser fire boomed in Noah's eardrums as what seemed like carbon copies of Limnic warriors from North Bloomfield, wearing different colors, attempted to prevent them from reaching the group of functioning shock elevators at the back of the building. Human and humanoid machines alike fell to the small yet formidable group of Cereus fighters. Bear shot, cut, and then slashed his way through two heavily armored trash can bots, skillfully transitioning between knife and gunfighting. He expertly bounded with Cheeks and a recovered Spazer to shock and stagger the enemy forces. "How's that leg augmentation feeling for you?" Cheeks yelled above the discharge of lasers and popping munitions. Spazer yelled over his shoulder. "Should've fucked with these things earlier. My leg feels like new." Cheeks raised up from behind their cover, the concrete base of a now empty fountain, and fired a high-powered laser round cutting through an approaching humanoid mech. "Once you start using them, it's hard to stop, young buck. You gotta be careful with it so you don't get addicted." "This coming from the smoked cannabis everyday dude himself," Spazer snickered while reloading his rifle. "Hey, weed's different," Cheeks yelled as he fired off another burst from his rifle. A short distance ahead, Bear grunted and motioned for them to advance, narrowly ducking just in time to avoid the blast from the enemy grenade. "Let's get moving. You ready, man?" he asked Spazer. "Roger that." A fresh magazine secured in his M4, Spazer nodded affirmatively. A second later, they were back in the fray. Near the entrance of the building, Lee and Noah stayed close, keeping their sights trained on the fighters approaching from the rear. Almost as soon as all 7 of them had entered the building, 6 humans with murderous eyes began to surround them, making retreat impossible. Unlike at North Bloomfield, Noah had no awareness of her body or of the atrocities of the melee. She was a floating weapon, with eyes and a trigger, sweeping her laser-mounted M4 side to side and feeling the push of recoil, deaf to the screams of pain, blind to the splattered blood of her enemies. In a remote part of her psyche, she questioned whether or not their human enemies fought voluntarily for Limnic or were being manipulated by Janus. She knew, in a different reality, she could have easily been on the other side of the gun, willing to give her life to put an end to Cereus and anyone who opposed rocking the delicate boat of the old world status quo. In a different reality, but not this one, she thought, as another enemy troop wearing jeans and old body armor fell in front of her. At some point in the exchange of weapons blasting around her, she had been hit on the left side of her abdomen. The unmistakable scent of singed flesh reached her nose, but she ignored the smell and the pain and continued to move forward. To her left, she noticed Lee moving with surprising mobility and competence. The old man had seen a firefight or two during his time in service of Cereus. She reserved it. The way he held his weapon, his battlefield awareness, and his stance all painted the picture of a career soldier who usually preferred a stylish suit to a field uniform. He did not use much ammunition, but whenever his weapon discharged, whatever was shooting back at him stopped moving. Close ahead of him, Jinhua and Daniel moved like twins joined by an invisible tether. In between ducking and shooting, Noah's eyes lit up as if she were viewing fireworks exploding on a starry summer night. She watched amazed as the unarmed teenagers aimed open-palmed hands at their mechanical foes, working together to disable and destroy them. Jinhua shot monoazo yellow beams with spiraling binary code. Then Daniel would trace visible red parabolas across the sky, and with lightning-quick movement, jumped the path, raining thin blue lasers from his arm gun. They appeared to be putting on the deadliest light show Noah had ever seen. "Almost there," Lee shouted, his voice barely audible above the symphony of battle sounds. He estimated there were 20 feet between them and the only functioning elevators in the building. Then the battle music, guns blasting, lasers firing, humans dying, machines breaking, gradually died down. "I think we got him," Cheek said, winded from running and ducking. Spacer and Bear followed closely behind him. That was easier than I thought.
No, it's not over.
Jinhua's voice surprised them all. All heads whipped to focus on her.
He's coming.
Who? Janus? Noe said.
No, Rodan.
Of the 4 primary elevators, only one was functional. Its silver doors stood out among the dilapidated and crumbling walls of the building. To Noe, they looked as if they had recently been cleaned. She read the digital floor indicator above the shining doors. Instead of the traditional yellow-colored digital numbers, the numbers were colored green. This is a shock elevator. Designed for some of the tallest buildings in the world, a shock elevator could move 50 floors in 10 seconds. Floor 47. She had 10 seconds to decide what to say to the man who'd betrayed them all. Noe's body tensed. She took a large, deep breath to prevent her trigger finger from slipping. All readied themselves for the elevator doors to slide open. Weapons and arms raised, they waited longer than expected. When the door finally did open, Rodan stood and stared out at them. For a brief moment, they exchanged glances of recognition and familiarity. It took several seconds for the memory of the morning to return to them. For them to remember he was their enemy now, along with Janus and all of Limnic. Rodan took advantage of the gap in time and moved with augmented human speed out of the elevator and towards Bear at the end of the line. Cheeks and Noe were the first to fire their weapons in defense, but immediately stopped as soon as Rodan shattered their line formation for fear of hitting one of their own. He moved like a giant blur, quickly disarming and destroying all weapons that Kyler's men and the rest of them carried. She could not see him, but could only hear the sound of twisting metal, blades clinging to the dusty floor, and other armaments being rendered useless. Each person staggered backward, blindsided by his blazing speed. Noah's forearms burned as she tightened her hold on the M4, but her grip wasn't strong enough. Soon she saw the muzzle of the weapon deform to an odd angle, then felt the tug of Rodan snatching the disabled rifle from her throbbing hands. Lee was the last to be disarmed, barely staying on his feet after the flurry of activity moved past him. Jinhua panicked when Rodan began to move. When she noticed the unnatural speed, she knew Janus had enhanced him. In exchange for great power and some warped form of eternity, her father's former friend had trained it, and just like Silas, was in many ways no longer human. She immediately raised her arms to delete his now corrupted code, felt the tingling of the mysterious light she could not understand, about to jump from her fingers, when Daniel's voice came into her head like a tiny whisper. Jinhua, no. Rodan had just disarmed her father and was moving toward Noe.
Daniel, but why?
Jinhua said, communicating telepathically. We should listen to what he has to say.
But...
Wait until I give the signal, then we'll do it. We'll take him down together just like all the others. Feihao? Daniel winked in her direction. Jinhua flashed him a look of confusion. She was beginning to feel very afraid for herself and everyone else.
Okay, Feihao.
Jinhua lowered her hands, but remained ready to act at any moment. God damn you, Rodan! Cheeks yelled. Now we can talk, Rodan said. He stood in front of the elevator, looking somewhat triumphant, clad in the all-black of his field gear. Will he kill us all now? Noah thought. She had to have answers before he made another move. Why are you doing this, Rodan? Her voice unexpectedly broke. It was difficult to contain her burning hatred for him and what he had done. She made no attempt to mask her rage. You were supposed to lead Cereus and help bring it to more people so that you could help humanity. Now you side with Janus and Limnic? Her nostrils flared and her breathing was heavy. She wanted to kill him, whether she had a weapon or not. Rodan kept his expression neutral. I knew you'd only be able to see it one way. After all, it makes sense that you would hold on to what you think to be true. What the hell are you talking about? Lee said, his voice calm yet tense. I'm talking about Cereus. You think you're fighting for a prolific organization, an institution that, if sustained, will potentially last as long as people buy into and believe in its function. Well, now you should know the truth, Lee. That Cereus was never meant to last as an organization. Its destruction was built into its design. Executive Order DD-5428 was a self-destruct order the founders inserted into its original charter. Lee's eyes softened. A rare expression of perplexed concern took over his face. No, that can't be. It's true. If you don't believe me, ask Bartow now. I know he's listening. He'll confirm it. Noe called his bluff. Bartow, come in. Are you hearing this? No response. Bartow? Bartow? Dread twisted her stomach into a knot. Could Rodan be telling the truth? She needed more answers. You're lying, Rodan. Why would the founder design Cereus' self-destruction into its plan and not tell anyone, even high-ranking officials, about it? Her eyes darted toward Lee and quickly back to Rodan. Rodan's eyes looked sad. He felt pity for her ignorance. Because the founders knew that, like all human creations, if Cereus prospered for too long, it would also become a contributor to the endless competition for resources and planetary destruction that has always characterized capitalism since the 18th century. You know the motto, protect people and planet. How could they stay true to that if their own creation was sucking up resources and abusing the earth? The founders hoped that I, as the last director of the organization, would be able to steer and crash it into the hearts of all its citizens. And in that way, the Cereus model would be permanently housed in their hearts and minds, without need of an executive director, or the founders themselves.
A self-governing society.
Jinhua whispered. Rodan nor anyone else heard her comment. Where does Limnic fit into all this? Lee asked, still reeling from Rodan's revelation. Janus and Lily started it together, but after a few years, Lily wanted out. She didn't like the bloody direction that it was taking and bowed out. Janus continued the work on his own. It started as a defensive measure to protect Cereus, established primarily by Silas. Then Janus and Lily began to use it to raise extra money and build influence for the Cereus social model. How does terrorism help get people to support Cereus? Noah spat, already over this explanation. Through fear. By the middle of this century, people were already fed up with the old world faux democratic capitalist model. Who could they turn to in order to remain safe and live their lives in peace? Cereus, Lee said slowly, haunted by the simplicity of the scheme. Rodan nodded. That's right. It was all part of Janus' strategy that was set in motion at Cereus' founding nearly 40 years ago. Lee took a step forward. And you? What caused you to turn? Why back him and Limnic, knowing what he's done and what he's planning to do? Do not lie to me. Rodan's face twitched, as if he temporarily recalled that the small Asian man standing before him had been his superior and friend. A moment later, the stone-faced, neutral expression erased the evidence of his former humanity. I've known for a while now that my role was just as a figurehead. The founders wanted someone to be captain of the ship when it finally sank, and I was that guy. Right place, wrong time, I suppose. But you wanted more, Lee said with bitterness. Come on, man, wouldn't you? I've worked my whole life as a public servant, first in the military, as a cop, and then for Cereus. I wasn't going to go out like that. After North Bloomfield, I saw an opportunity to secure my legacy and help mankind take a giant leap forward in its evolution. He noticed they seemed to be at least considering his words now. The cadence of his voice sped up to capitalize on the opportunity. Trust me, playing nice with the bureaucrats of the old world and dealing with the endless cycle of political bullshit is no way to move us forward. Janus has a plan, and it's gonna work. You'll see. It's gonna make us all better in the end. Don't you want that for her? He gestured his head in Jinhua's direction. Li didn't take the bait and kept his eyes trained on Rodan. Out of the corner of his eye, he was proud to see that Jinhua had done the same. Rodan noticed Kyler's men were beginning to close the distance between them and his position in front of the elevator. He was running out of time. Have I stalled them enough? That and one last unfinished piece of business still lingered in his brain. He turned toward Noe and said, Noe, what I felt with you was real. His face showed signs of morphing into regret. Noah's eyes narrowed. Please, don't go there. No, it was. I mean it. I didn't mean to hurt you. Maybe at some point in the future, you could forgive me? She shook her head softly, flabbergasted that he would dare seek forgiveness after all he had done. His words were like leaves in the wind, silently being carried away, never reaching a firm destination. Noe stared at him, fury in her eyes. If you're done talking, let's get on with it then. We've wasted enough time with you. I know I have. But he wasn't done talking. He took a step forward and continued to speak. His voice began to rise. We're giving you, Noe, and all of you, one last chance to end your resistance and join us in ushering our species into its next phase of evolution. One that gives us all the power to live as gods as long as we're able, and to live a good life of virtue that will help us strive toward the limits of our potential. You sound like him, Li said. Whether he was being manipulated by Janus or not was irrelevant at this point. His friend was truly lost. Rodan, it's over. What you and Janus are doing is manipulation on a global scale. Forcing people to evolve by making them digital slaves is not true evolution. You've let him poison your mind with his rhetoric. You've become all the things that we dedicated our entire lives to protect people and society from. Li shook his head, almost regretful of the truth in his words. You've become the small man who is afraid to die. Li's words had done more damage than any laser or rifle could do. It showed on Rodan's face, and he was livid. I see how it is. He let silence linger in the air a while, knowing that Kyler's men were only a few steps away. Then I see there's no saving you then. With a curt nod, Rodan made the first move. In a quick draw motion, he produced a concealed handgun-sized firearm. Noe only saw the glint of a black weapon appear before she noticed it wave in her direction. The sound of a single shot had always seemed louder to her than the sound of several being fired at once. In a futile motion, she raised her arms to defend herself, but it was too late. The round had already found its intended target. Chapter 62 Versus Rodan. All had instinctively ducked down or dropped to a prone position after the single shot echoed throughout the shell of the old tower. When the noise died down from the sudden massive movement, Rodan watched them all do as he would have done in their position. Check for superficial or fatal wounds. He viewed their faces of alarm and tension with a blank expression. He was no longer a soldier or an executive. He was something above societal labels. Onlookers would have called him a zealot, but to him even that title was too constricted in its definition. He felt like another being entirely, a different species, the hawk to the ant. He could see things that they could not. From his omnidirectional view, he saw them all scrambling and calling to one another. The only one who gave no vocal response was Lee. He lay gasping and coughing, covering an expanding redness on his tactical shirt, just below his body armor. Rodan considered ending his longtime colleague's suffering, but a single shred of brotherly remembrance stopped him, and like the merciful higher-order entity that he was, allowed him a final moment with his soon-to-be fatherless daughter. He watched the once straight-faced and expressionless girl fall apart as she knelt by his side. Pain and sadness animated her face as she fought a losing battle to save her father's life.
Dad! Dad!
She cried. The old man moaned with a pained response. As he stood viewing the scene from on high, Rodan hardly noticed the teenage boy step out of the enemy formation and approach him. In his mind, he was a single gnat buzzing toward his face, noticeable yet harmless. The brown-haired and clear-eyed youth brushed past Rodan on his way to the elevators. None of his former colleagues seemed to notice the movement. They were too focused on the most salient source of their rage to hear the silver doors clamp shut and the resulting launch of the shock elevator. Janus had taken care of the boy, just as he said he would. One less obstacle, Rodan thought. Only 1 minute had elapsed since the single shot of his trusty 6-SOR P365 turned his former friend's world upside down. Now it's time to mercy kill all of them. With his enemy's weapons disabled and their movement frozen through his new chip manipulation powers, they could put up little resistance. Rodan took the opportunity to activate another one of Janus's toys, a cloaking device to mask his giant frame. He had no idea how it worked, but suddenly had the urge to have some fun in dispatching his enemies. All of a sudden, the old German-American-made handgun felt too impersonal a killing implement. Everything would be over after a single twitch of a finger. That was too fast. A part of him wanted them to feel the slow death he had been experiencing since he'd assumed command of the ghost ship that was Cereus. He wanted them to come to the realization, as he had done weeks ago, that there was no escape from this whirlpool, no stopping the undertow of an indifferent cosmos, that they were not special or unique, that their flesh could be liquefied, evaporated, and scattered to the vacuum of eternity at any moment by the unflinching coldness of an unseen higher order. He was that higher order. He became that invisible specter of human death. He wanted to pull the knife. He wanted to see the terror-stricken faces grasping and clawing in order to save themselves. He wanted them to be as empty as he felt. Everything had been decided. All was resolved in his mind. The only thing left for him to do was to make it a reality. Then he could die a happy man. Hot tears of anger filled Noah's eyes. Seeing Jinhua's anguished exertions to save her dying parent brought images of her mother and father to her mind. The unwelcome pictures dredged up the scabbed wounds of her own guilt and made her slow to react when Rodan disappeared from sight. She wanted to help Jinhua and Li, but also wanted to prevent any more injury to her comrades or herself. To her surprise, Cheeks, Bear, and Spazer seemed to have regained control over their bodies. Was this another game Rodan was playing? Even if it was, this might be their final opportunity to fight back. Rodan! She screamed, "Come out and fight!" She knew he was there, watching, using some type of alien cloaking technology to mask his movements. Then she saw him momentarily flicker into view. He was standing only 3 feet away, approaching to no doubt kill her. His technology appeared to be breaking down at the crucial moment. Instinctively, she jumped back, while Cheeks rushed to disarm him. A brief struggle ensued between the two men, as the shorter man grappled and attempted to subdue the taller man by forcing him to the debris-littered floor. But ultimately, Rodan's physical superiority triumphed over Cheeks' flabby body, and he fell back, grunting with pain, as blood began to drip from superficial knife slashes on his forearms and a broken nose. Spacer, stunned by his mentor's defeat, entered the fray.
Did it now.
He threw decisive punches and kicks, in a stance that reminded Noe of the outdated Bruce Lee movies she had watched a long time ago with her mother. His technique, while competent looking, mimicked a Hollywood stunt fighter. Perfect for well-choreographed action sequences, but not so effective in a real fight.
You want some of
The
this?
strikes lacked follow-through and impact.
Come on, I got you.
A few blows haphazardly struck Rodan, making him stagger backward and drop his knife. But with both hands free, he caught one of Spacer's clumsy kicks, then twisted it at the ankle with a sharp rotation. Noe heard the unnatural cracks and pops of multiple bones breaking, followed by a young man's scream as she saw his formerly wounded leg flail at an odd angle within the bigger man's grip. With the strength of a wrestler, Rodan swung his unconscious body in a circular motion, then flung him away. Spacer's head landed hard against the floor. Then he lay there, unmoving. Bear was the last to approach. Rodan's expression remained neutral as he examined his opponent with speedy diagnostic rigor. He had been wounded during his heroics in the initial skirmish with the Limnic fighters and was in a weakened state. Though Bear was slightly larger than him and did his best to appear battle-ready, his body language told a different story. The slightly slouching posture, twitching of the eyebrow, rapid movement of the pulse beating in his neck, informed Rodan that his rival was a wounded animal ready for slaughter. Despite his debilitated state, the animal fought as if on the brink of extinction. Bear entered a low stance and rushed him, but at the last second slipped to the right. He caught Rodan's arm, straightened it, then thrust at the elbow with a devastating palm strike designed for breaking. Instead of hearing the sound of shattering bone, he only heard the sound of his own animalistic groan. Then the pain came, sharp and dizzying. Rodan's arm was like steel, unyielding. Bear looked down at the palm of his hand and saw clear evidence of the blood pooling beneath the thin skin. By the time he looked up, it was too late. Rodan stood him up with a counter palm strike to the forehead, then proceeded to pummel every pressure point at the front of Bear's body, with a flurry of rapid finger strikes, finishing with a sternum-crushing blow, which no doubt impacted his fragile heart and lungs. Bear fell backward to the dusty floor, twitching, gasping for air, laboring to voluntarily move even the tiniest of muscles. Rodan lingered for a second to admire his victory over the greatest fighter that stood in his way. Then his eyes shifted to Noe. Her defiant gaze slowed his movements. Although she had no weapon, Rodan knew she would fight to the death if necessary. Their shared moment of passion and physical pleasure the night before made his body yearn for her touch. He hesitated with an empty look on his face, conflicted. If I don't at least incapacitate her, she will surely kill me. It was a human moment of indecision, one that exposed a fleeting window of vulnerability. Behind Rodan's back, Jinhua's brain was processing at full capacity, nearly overwhelmed by the heat of the moment. Her father had been shot and was losing blood fast. The 3 fighters had been defeated, and Rodan was approaching Noe with killer intention. What puzzled and jammed her logic most of all was Daniel. In the initial confusion after Rodan shot her father, she had seen him walk absent-mindedly toward their new enemy. His pace was casual as he brushed past the man, no, the thing that wanted to kill them all. More confusing still was the fact that she could no longer feel her special connection with him. She had no idea why, but she knew only one person could pull off such a trick.
Janus.
But she had no time to consider or look into how he had done it. She was too preoccupied putting pressure on her father's wound. She had managed to slow the flow of blood, but it kept coming, covering her hands in crimson liquid. Jinhua watched her father's face carefully to ensure he was still alive. She watched it change from pain to pallid terror as he struggled to form the words.
Jinhua, behind you.
Maintaining one hand on her father's wound, Jinhua whipped her head to the side to see Rodan approaching her, knife drawn, eyes empty.
I guess he spared Noe.
Jinhua thought. This did not surprise her, as she had viewed their late-night tryst in all its intimate detail during the morning meeting, and was aware of the complicated history and emotions between both of them. Behind Rodan, Noe took advantage of the opportunity to tend to the dazed spacer, while a bloody cheeks knelt over Bear's body. They were alive, but none were in a position to help her. Jinhua raised her hand to disable Rodan with the delete code, just as she had done with Silas and all of the other Limnic mechs. The hand, stained in her father's still warm blood, raised, palm open, as she called on intuition to do the rest. But no yellow-coated light shot out of her hand, and the man in black, death in flesh and code, kept coming. Suddenly, she was a skinny 17-year-old, facing a middle-aged military-trained killing machine with enhanced physical and mental capabilities. The odds were not in her favor. Rodan saw her confident expression fold as the grim realization dawned on her.
She knows she can't win.
A smirk drew itself onto his face.
Looks like the light show's over, Jeannie. I'm sorry it had to be this way. You should have joined us when you had the chance,
he said. Out of genuine fear, Jinhua kept her arm raised, palm open, hoping the universal sign for stop would somehow prevent this monster from killing her and her father. Then a reddish-pink light reflected in her tear-soaked eyes. It flashed from the palm of her hand, causing Rodan to recoil, then died away, leaving only her thin arm lifted in self-defense. On the other side of Rodan, Noe saw the brilliant, magenta-colored spark. Then a fraction of a second later, felt her body tighten like a coiled spring full of unreleased energy. Then suddenly there were 2 Noes. It was the flesh and blood her, irate, exhausted, desperate. Then another her, enveloped in a magenta-hued aura. She was Quantum Noe. Her highlighted self perceived time differently. The rules of seconds, minutes, and hours no longer applied, and she, or it, moved at quantum intervals that Noe could not grasp or understand. Classic Noe observed as Quantum Noe appeared by the broken bear's fallen laser knife, brought its electric blue flame to life, then with one fierce thrust, let out a strained cry as the burning blade pierced Rodan's body armor, cutting through his very human skin. When Noe blinked again, Quantum Noe was no longer there. It was only the real her holding the laser knife as if she had delivered the killing blow. Questions of the how and why of the last several seconds were supplanted by her overwhelming desire to kill Rodan for everything he had done.
She was happy to have stabbed him in the back, as she didn't want to see the pleading in his eyes when she twisted the hot blade in his flesh. She knew he still had enough strength to turn around and kill her, yet she felt no resistance from him. He just began to choke and cough as warm blood filled foreign chambers in his body. After several seconds, Noe released her grip on the knife and stepped back. Rodan's body had fallen forward, lying in stillness in an expanding pool of blood. The throbbing of her pulse in her right temple returned her to reality. Her thoughts immediately turned to Lee and the others. She quickly returned to Jinhua, where a wounded but still helpful Spazer attended to Lee's wounds. At first, Noe could not believe that he had been able to move himself to Lee's position across the room after his horrific injury. Then she was quickly reminded of the augmentations that ran in his young veins. The sound of his voice snapped her out of her temporary stupor and back to their dire situation.
"He's hurt pretty bad. I think the bullet is still in there, lucky for us."
His remark did little to boost his or anyone else's confidence about Lee's odds of survival. Cheeks struggled to his knees, fighting through the pain of several cracked ribs to attend to Bear's injuries. The once mighty warrior's skin looked pale, and he seemed to be floating precariously between life and death. He radioed for Barto or Van to bring 2 field trauma kits, then began to do whatever he could to save his dying friend.
Come on, get up, man, get up.
After 2 minutes of burning exertion, he could only hold him, whispering reassurance.
You gonna be
Words he knew Bear could probably no longer hear or understand.
Gonna let you go.
From the front doors of the building, Van emerged, sweaty and scared, running at full speed with the medical kits. He ignored the smoking mechs and the festering smell of dead humans as he sprinted to the elevators where his friends waited. "Oh my God," he whispered, tears coming to his eyes.
"Don't just stand there,"
Cheeks barked.
"Give me that damn kit! And take the other one to Spazer. Come on now, get yourself together."
Van snapped into readiness, then dutifully began to follow Cheeks' instructions. As Cheeks prepared the kit and tended to Bear, Noe and Jinhua stood over him. Noe said, "We have to go get Janus and end this, right now." His usual hard edge dulled by the loss of his commander and the decimation of his comrade. Cheeks glanced up at Noe and the girl, then nodded. "I know. Go get your man. Get him for all of us." There was an uncharacteristic softness in Cheeks' voice that surprised Noe. "We'll take care of Jinhua's old man." Jinhua nodded affirmatively. She appeared dirty and shaken. Her eyes darted back and forth between Cheeks and where her father lay dying behind her. Noe, with blood, ash, and sweat clinging to her face, placed a trembling yet supportive hand on her shoulder. Cheeks marveled at her poise and determined nature, but knew she was afraid. "Come on, Space Force. You got this, right?" Noe returned a curt nod. Cheeks returned the gesture, then continued working on the now unconscious Bear. "You're my responsibility for now. I won't let you down," Noe thought, as she stood before the silver doors of the elevator. Jinhua stood with tears still rolling down her cheek. She attempted to remove some of her father's blood from her hands by wiping them on her tactical pants, but they would not come clean. She looked deep into Noe's eyes and said,
I trust you. I know you won't.
On any other day, Noe would have been creeped out by the fact that a teenage girl could read her thoughts. But today, it was comforting knowing that they would be together when they finally faced Janus. Cheeks watched as the two of them stepped into the silver doors of the shock elevator. Jinhua looked through puffy eyes at her father lying on the floor, then quickly forced herself to look up at anything that wasn't him. Noe had closed her eyes and seemed to be doing some type of deep breathing exercise. no doubt repeating some simplified version of her pre-battle ritual at North Bloomfield. When the doors closed, Cheeks couldn't help but feel a stab of regret that the fate of humanity was now in the hands of a Space Force veteran and a skinny teenage girl with weird powers. Should have been us, but they are only hope now. Spacer's voice burst through his moment of thoughtfulness. Cheeks, if we don't get Mr. Ma out of here fast, I don't think he's gonna make it. Cheeks glanced down at Bear. He was still breathing, but barely. Right, let's get moving. Janus is up to them too now. Chapter 63. Strings. Jinhua mentally readied herself as the shock elevator doors slid closed and prepared to launch her and Noe to the summit of the dilapidated building. She marveled that the rotting structure even had such functioning technology. The elevator had been invented decades before Jinhua was born by some guy named Musk. Or was it Mustard or Must? She could never quite remember the name. All she knew was that the guy was something of a lunatic in the early part of the century and had wanted to construct an elevator to the moon. The ambitious venture ultimately failed. However, the technology was scaled down and put to use in elevator shafts around the world. The science and engineering of the elevator's operation fascinated Jinhua. It involved being launched by a miniature explosion, similar to a bullet being fired from a gun, and some kind of gravity exchange that gave passengers a feeling of weightlessness as they ascended at blinding speeds toward the top of very tall buildings. People called them shock elevators because of the initial surprise that one experienced when riding one. It had an official technical name, but Jinhua couldn't remember what it was. It doesn't really matter what it's called. I hate writing these things. She braced herself for launch, reminding herself to relax and allow the technology of the elevator to do its job. Noe still seemed tense, staring directly ahead at the silver doors. Jinhua wanted to speak to her, but couldn't find the right words, so she said the first thing that came to her mind. I'm sorry you had to do what you did back there. The words floated through the air like an unpleasant aroma, waiting for either person to acknowledge them. You liked him, didn't you? I did, Noe said, giving no hint of emotion. I see. It's not a big deal. It's done now. Jinhua gave no response. She had no way of relating to Noe's situation. What is taking this elevator so long? What was that light back there? Noe asked all of a sudden. I saw this purplish light. Then, the next thing I know, I'm literally standing in two places at once. It was unreal. Her face remained neutral, but her voice rose and fell with genuine confusion and amazement. Jinhua examined her hands for a moment. Dried blood covered her palms like fresh plaster. On the dorsal side, there was less red, but a monkish dirt-blood mixture caked itself under her short fingernails. Her examination complete, she found no physical evidence to explain what had just occurred in the lobby. I don't know what it was. I just wanted to protect my dad, myself, and everyone else. Then it just happened. Noe turned and said with a soft voice, It's okay. I'm just happy whatever it was helped us stop Rodan from hurting anyone else. He really... A sudden jolt cut her off. The shock from the launch of the elevator caused Jinhua and Noe to stumble where they stood. In less than 10 seconds, they would be at the top of the tower. Jinhua felt her stomach twisting into knots as the pressure from the catapulting force acted on her internal organs. The feeling was so unpleasant she nearly vomited. Clenching her eyes shut and swallowing hard, she gulped bitterness down her throat and hoped it would be over soon. Then it came, the brief feeling of weightlessness during the ascent. For several seconds, she felt normal enough to open her eyes. In that interval of time, she turned her attention to Noe. Her hands and eyes performed a last-minute check of her weapons, a black rifle, and the laser knife she used to kill Rodan only minutes ago. To Jinhua, she was a badass warrior, or at least she looked the part. Growing up without a mother, she had never had a female authority figure to look up to. In one day, Noe had unknowingly taught her a great deal about strength. Bravery and courage were words Jinhua had primarily associated with competitive settings, in which winning and losing were the outcomes of a good or poor performance. Today, Noe had shown her that not all battles are fought on a track, field, or court. Some of the greatest conflicts are within the mind. The war, ever raging, most will never be able to account for the dead or the number of victories and defeats. But the strongest fought daily, with no hope of glory or accolades because it was the only way to move forward, the only way to truly evolve without the aid of biohacking or digigenomics. Noe was one of those people, and she deeply respected her for it. As the elevator climbed, Noe made a final inspection of her gear. Damn, not much ammo left. I have to be precise with my shots. She glanced at Jinhua beside her. The girl looked somewhat pale and looked generally beat up. Noe placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Stay close to me, okay? Who knows what tricks Janus will have up his sleeve? Noe let a small smile illuminate her face. Jinhua nodded. She felt comforted by this military warrior's presence, even if she had little actual combat experience. We can do this. We have to do this. She returned Noe's smile. Then she felt the compression of an artificial gravity generator slowing their ascent, allowing her to feel normal once again. Are you ready? Noe asked, eyes narrowed. Yes, let's do this. Noe gave the magazine of her old M4 a hard tap to secure it in place. Okay. She took one last deep breath to slow her pounding heart and calm her nerves. Even in the stuffy elevator and the sweaty air, the deliberate expansion of her lungs left her awash in clear-headedness. This stuff really does work. She beamed inwardly at her tiny victory. At that moment, the cellar elevator doors slid open, revealing an unfamiliar scene. The room looked abandoned. At least, that's the way Jinhua would have described it. The ripped-up carpet was dirt-tan stained with decades of abuse, with lighter patches where heavy furniture used to sit. Her eyes scanned the ceiling, where the absence of insulation exposed the cold skeleton of the roof above. Forgotten wires of all functions and pipes for heating and cooling dangled precariously overhead, looking like an upside-down scrap heap reaching toward the floor. The exposed building infrastructure ran the length of the ceiling, all the way to the cloudy floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the San Francisco Bay. Even in the dying light of the afternoon, she could make out the lights of the Golden Gate Bridge through a thin sheet of rolling fog that began to consume the water. The only light in the room came from 8 flickering fluorescent lights dangling from above. Orange and reddish sunlight peeked through the thin clouds, giving the room a horror movie vibe. After taking in their surroundings, Jinhua's pupils dilated at the sight of the micro-quantum computer on a giant old executive desk. The rhythmic churning of its internal workings reverberated throughout the room. The sight of the carefully engineered components, arranged to replicate the harsh cold of outer space, blew Jinhua's mind when she had first seen pictures of old room-sized models. Now, all of those components could fit in a container the size of a shoebox. Pretty amazing. Unconsciously, she had taken 2 small steps toward the desk in order to get a closer look at the machine. Noe's firm grip on her forearm nudged her back to the present and the very real danger that they were in.
Jinhua, get back!
Noe whispered in a scolding tone, forcing Jinhua slightly behind her. She swept her rifle toward a lightless corner of the room, then suddenly locked it in position. Jinhua's breath caught when she saw her target. "We were wondering where you went," Noe said. "Okay, come on out, nice and slow." Daniel emerged from the shadows, hands in his pockets, looking as if he were taking a leisurely stroll. The muzzle from Noe's rifle followed his every step until he stopped beside the great desk. Jinhua neither saw, sensed, nor felt any sign of Janus, but knew he was somewhere close, invisible. Perhaps he too was masking his own digital signature from her? Probably. Meanwhile, she desperately began to try and re-establish her telepathic connection with Daniel. It felt as if she were attempting to open a tightly sealed bottle of honey. No matter how many ways she tried, every try left her feeling exhausted and even more frustrated. "Hands out of the pockets, kid." "Slow," Noe said with caution. A red gleam sparked in Daniel's eyes as he pulled his hands out of his pockets, producing 2 arm guns. Leaping away from each other, both Noe and Jinhua evaded the first shots of brilliant blue light that impacted where both had been standing. Noe immediately returned fire. The impact of her rounds clanked against Daniel's surprisingly sturdy torso. She continued to move and shoot, circling Daniel's position. The teenage cyborg stayed by the desk, his robotic body forming a barrier between Noe's shots and the fragile quantum computer pulsing behind him. "He's protecting the computer," Jinhua thought as the coded yellow light streaked out of her palm. Daniel evaded the blast, training both of his gun arms on his enemies. Then, dismay came to his face. "Jinhua, Noe, you have to get away! It's Janus! He's taking control of my body! I can't control it!" Daniel continued to shoot at them, while his face strained and contorted. Jinhua knew he was fighting Janus's puppetry, but could not free himself from the strings. "Daniel, hold on!" Jinhua cried. Her mind blazed in an effort to find a way to stop Daniel without harming him while she continued to shoot purposely clumsy, aureoline-colored beams of light in his direction. The boy let out a savage cry, then screamed. 2 arced parabolas drew themselves from both arms, one over each of his female combatants. Both knew what was coming. There was no way they could outrun his speed, or the fiery beams that would cut them to shreds within a few seconds. The attack was unblockable. Noe stood her ground. Jinhua didn't hesitate. At the moment Daniel's feet left the floor, Jinhua fired curved yellow lines from both hands at Daniel. The delete codes hit him square in the chest. His signature attack interrupted, he tumbled forward to the floor. His cybod crashed with tremendous force, leaving him incapacitated. He lay still beside the desk, arm extended in Jinhua's direction. Noe called from the other side of the room. "Is he disabled?" She kept her smoking rifle on Daniel's body, even though she knew it hadn't been very effective against him. Jinhua gave a solemn nod. "Yeah, he is." She had rushed over to check on him. His clothes and skin had been ripped from the battle in the lobby and Noe's shots. Hints of his alloy chassis were visible through the dead artificial skin, His face was dirty and blemished, but was still boyishly charming, even with the eyes closed. "Will he be okay?" Noe asked, sensitive to Jinhua's feelings again, now that he was no longer a threat. "I'm not sure," Jinhua answered, her voice small. "Janus did this," Noe said in an aggressive tone. "Come out and show yourself!" she yelled. Only the reverberation of her own voice responded to her exasperated cry. Jinhua continued to examine Daniel, her hands running up and down his body, looking for some way to reboot or reset him. "I think I might be able to." "I'm here." Janus's unmistakable voice caused Jinhua and Noe to look up. There, standing behind the executive desk, their enemy peered at them with soft amusement in his eyes. Jinhua bolted to her feet, then aimed her hands. Noe elevated her rifle, then slipped her finger in the trigger guard. Both were ready for the final battle.
Chapter 64. Janus. Janus was standing behind a large oak desk, which probably used to belong to an old insurance tycoon. His silver hair was drawn into a ponytail. It heavily contrasted with his midnight blue slacks and vest, but matched his silver shirt. He took unhurried steps from behind the desk, making no attempt to hide in the presence of Noe's loaded weapon. He stopped directly in front of the grand desk and the still throbbing light of the quantum computer. "Hello, ladies. I'm happy that you've come all this way to see me." He flashed a look of pity in Noe and Jinhua's direction. "I suppose you're here to kill me. Am I right?" "This monster, Noe's mother, Silas, Rodan, Daniel, her father. He's manipulated them all. Now he plans to do it on a global scale," Jinhua thought, her posture rigid with rising hate for this man. Only a few feet from her, Noe took a bold step forward, keeping her weapon trained on her enemy. "You read minds, so you should already know the answer to that question," Noe said, spitting her words. Janus nodded in a slow and understanding manner. "You're right." He looked at both of them with an intense and methodical gaze. "They are truly not ready, but evolution cannot wait. I will make them ready." Noe didn't care for the look in his eyes. He appeared to be studying them, most likely preparing for his attack. His face was like a slimy creature from under a heavy rock. She wanted to step on it and hear it explode and pop beneath her boots, crushing power. Then Janus made his first move. In response, Noe flinched and almost applied the necessary pressure to fire her weapon. As if caught in a police spotlight, he raised his arms in a position of surrender. His hands were empty. For a fleeting moment, he appeared to her as a feeble old man. He should be lazing about in quiet refuge, instead of heading a terrorist organization. "Then why do you hesitate?" Janus asked. His tone reflected genuine curiosity. "Why do you not destroy me now and be done with it?" Jinhua held her breath, wondering how Noe would answer the question, or if she would answer at all. Noe leaned forward, ready to absorb the anticipated recoil from the blast of her rifle. Outside, a layer of darkness sat over a line of lapis blue sky, while the San Francisco city lights shimmered below. Inside of the room, the buzzing of the fluorescent lights and the repetitive mechanical heart of the quantum computer pervaded the air. All of these details were lost on Noe. She could only see Janus in the flesh and in her mind's eye. He was everywhere. Seconds ticked by as she contemplated her response, keeping her rifle fixed on him. "Why did you kill my mother?" Janus shook his head. "Oh, you poor child. Your mother told me long ago that she wanted you to be able to choose between Cereus and the old world, to be able to forge your own path." Looking her up and down, he regarded her as if she were a wounded animal. Even with the rifle muzzle floating before him, he showed no signs of detectable fear. "And look where it has brought you. A lifetime of servitude to a nation that could care less about your sacrifice, compounded by a lonely and purposeless existence. It is not the life that she wanted for you, and you know that." "Shut up!" Noe said. Her strained outcry bounced in invisible patterns around the shell of the old office. "Don't you talk about her as if you knew her at all!" Noe's anger was reaching a boiling point. She could feel it. But something prevented her from pulling the trigger and killing the old man. It was a tiny flame of intuition that could be extinguished by a wayward zephyr. If it went out, any remaining self-restraint would be lost. Out of the corner of her eye, Noe perceived Jinhua pass a wordless message. Formless intuition beckoned Noe's senses, but she ignored it. Janus's face invaded her mental landscape, as if it were an alien spacecraft, casting some misshapen shadow over the air, blocking out everything else. Her weapon remained fixed on her enemy. "Everything you say is a manipulation. Just like you plan to control humanity with your fucking mind control. It's sick. You claim that you want to save humanity, but what you're doing is enslaving people on a global scale. All to feed your fucked up ego. You're not human." Janus laughed heartily, entertained by her tantrum. "I am merely doing what capitalism has done from the shadows for the last 300 years. I'm just doing it better. The corporations of the old world hid in plain sight, masking their manipulations with catchy slogans, unfettered consumerism, feel-good yet useless self-preserving philanthropy, sugary substances, binge-worthy media, and cheap addictive drugs. Cereus and Limnic will at least give people the freedom to knowingly choose how they will live their lives, instead of surreptitiously stealing it from them with false ideals of unwarranted materialism or hollow patriotism." From where she stood, Jinhua saw the effect of Janus's rhetoric. Noe's stance appeared to slacken somewhat, and the angle of her rifle began to dip toward the floor. "Noe, don't do it. You can't." She silently pleaded with her, knowing there was little she could do to stop what would most likely happen next. Janus, hands still raised, took cautious steps in Noe's direction. "Noe, there is something you need to understand before you decide what course of action you will take next. I need you to think and listen." He had evaded her question like the master manipulator he was. "No, I don't want to hear it. You murdered her, didn't you? Just admit it. You killed her for no reason. And you loved her. And for some fucked up reason, she loved you too." "Yes, Noe, I did love her, and I..." The blast from the rifle made Jinhua wince and shut her eyes. Instinctively, she thrust her hands over her ears, shielding them from the burst of a second shot. But it never came. When she opened her eyes and lowered her hands, Noe stood with the hot rifle angled toward the floor. Then Jinhua saw the silver-haired corpse prostrated in front of the ancient desk. It was him, and it was over. Janus was dead. Why am I crying? Must be tears of joy. Noe swiftly wiped the tears away with the back of her hand and took gliding steps, quiet and soft, toward Janus's corpse. She wanted to confirm that he was indeed dead, She knelt down and placed her index and middle finger on his wrinkly neck, searching for a pulse. There was none. A large exhale escaped her lips. She felt as if she hadn't been breathing since the elevator doors opened, marveling at the fact that she hadn't lost consciousness. Her head began to clear, as the faces of all of her friends flooded her mind.
He's gone, Mom. Now you can rest in peace.
Relaxed, free from the shadow of Janus's alien craft looming overhead, she became aware of Jinhua's presence in the room again. The girl had moved to the large office desk and studied the mini quantum computer with anxious eyes. To Noe, the beat from its monotonous rhythm sounded louder now that Janus was gone. Jinhua had picked up Janus's device and was interacting with the complex machine, employing her powers to the full extent to understand and process what she was seeing. As he searched, scanned, and typed, a tightness began to wrap itself around her, as if a giant hand was closing its grip around her body, making it difficult for her heart to pump or for her lungs to inflate. As she worked, twilight was quickly approaching outside of the floor-to-ceiling windows. The charcoal clouds had cleared, and the sky displayed its last blanket of blue over an orangish-red streak. The bay had nearly completed its nightly transformation into a small black sea with frigid waters, capped with layers of fog. Noe approached the desk, wondering what Jinhua was studying.
Jinhua, we should get downstairs and check on your dad. Hey, are you okay?
Jinhua looked pale as she turned to Noe. Fearfulness showed on her young face. Noe immediately knew that something was very wrong. The unseeable hand began to close around her too. Its crushing embrace made Noe's body react as if she were underwater in the blackness of the sea, cold and pressured.
What is it?
Noe dared to ask.
Noe, I don't think you should have shot him. Why not? What did you see on the computer? Why can't I talk right now? Jinhua, are you there?
Jinhua's concerned face began to dematerialize in front of her eyes. At first, it began to blink away rapidly, then she completely disappeared.
What is happening? Jinhua, where are you?
The rising panic of her voice was unfamiliar and frightening. Then the floor began to quake below her feet.
Oh my God, is this building being demolished? Is this Limnic?
With Jinhua nowhere in sight, she sprinted back toward the elevator. Falling debris from the remains of the exposed ceiling rained down, threatening to impale her or render her unconscious, which certainly meant death. With swift movement, she narrowly avoided being hit by one of the falling fluorescent lights. It shattered with a loud crash when it hit the ground, throwing razor-sharp glass and plastic everywhere. Noe reached the elevator, mashing the open button with panic. But it was too late. A stray ceiling tile fell on her head and broke. A blinding white light infiltrated her vision as she staggered and fell to the floor. To her surprise, she did not lose consciousness. However, the building continued to shake with more violence than before. It would probably only be a few seconds before it was all over. Dazed on the floor, with a minor concussion, cuts and scrapes on her arms, Noe felt like she could fight no more.
I'm gonna die.
Just as she began to shut her eyes to prepare for the end, a circle of blue light began to surround her helpless position. It started small, but the radius continued to expand until it consumed the entire office. The desk, the twinkling cityscape outside, the crumbling roof, all were eclipsed by the growing blue field. When the sea of blue finished expanding, the only physical object left was the now mysteriously quiet mini quantum computer. With the desk gone, the machine appeared suspended in midair, as if it were some magical artifact from a long-extinct civilization. Noe's gaze circled the blueness. Daniel's body and Jinhua were nowhere in sight. Noe stumbled to her feet and grabbed her rifle. Her legs felt unstable, and her vision was foggy from her minor head injury. As her eyes focused in the blue field, her heart nearly stopped when she saw who stood before her. It was Janus, very alive, his face deadly serious. But how? Are you ready to listen now? He asked. Chapter 65. Q-Janus. Noe couldn't believe her eyes. Janus was alive, but she had no idea why. But you were dead, she said in a mystified whimper. He began to walk toward her, but instantly he vanished. Noe squeezed the trigger of her rifle, but there was no bang. There was no sound from the weapon at all. Only a flash, followed by silence. But why? She extended the firearm to examine it. In a reflex movement, she slapped, pulled, observed, released, tapped, then shot the rifle again. It was as if the rifle fired, but had been muted by some giant remote control. Same thing? Sports didn't work? What the hell? She was about to perform her rifle malfunction drill again, when Janus reappeared behind her, clutching a knife to her throat. Noe gasped, then lifted her chin, putting as much space between the blade and her neck as possible. You will listen now. Drop your weapon. With obedience, she let the weapon fall to the blue surface at her feet. It made no sound. This time, she was the one to lift her hands in surrender. What is this place? You should be dead. This is a reality of my creation, Janus responded. I control and see all in this space. Things were beginning to fall into place for Noe. This is Janus's game. He makes the rules. No guns allowed must be one of them. How is he doing this? Is it something to do with that computer? Yes. It is. I always knew you were a smart woman, Janus said, having read her thoughts. This is one of the many uses of this incredible technology. The ability to project multiple realities simultaneously and blend them at will. Then that means... Noe said, her neck beginning to burn from holding it away from the blade. Yes. This is what occurred downstairs when you defeated Rodan. Jinhua somehow tapped into this ability, allowing you to split yourself among realities for a brief moment in time. Not even I possess such a gift. She is truly special. What did you do to her, Janus? She does not exist within the rule set of this reality. I will deal with her in time. Of course. No Jinhua's allowed. Another rule. To Noe, his reality was beginning to sound like a secret society, where the only people and things that existed did so for the benefit of him. But why bring her here? Why not just write her out of the rule set? Or worse yet, write a rule like, Noe has a massive, paralyzing heart attack within 5 minutes upon entering Janus's world. Death Note style. She pictured her face in agony, her hands clawing at her own chest as her heart stumbled at an abnormal rhythm, the uncomfortable pressure mounting until one of her heart's valves blew up, leaving the unnatural expression of pre-death fright forever on her face. Noe swallowed hard, with the sharp implement half an inch away from the thundering pulse in her neck vein, wondering if Janus had already written such a rule into existence and only stalled until it would take effect.
If he had read her thoughts, he gave no hint of knowing her fear as he began to speak. Long ago, when Dr. AK launched Project Egregore, he was obsessed with creating human consciousness, and as a result, I was born. He not only wanted his creation to be a form of digital consciousness, he also wanted to evolve the human species. This could only be done by creating digital DNA of all biological human functions, including reproduction. Noe struggled under his surprisingly strong grip, already bored of hearing his voice again.
So what? I've heard this before,
Noe said through clenched teeth. Janus continued as if he hadn't heard her. Before his death, Dr. AK spoke with me and encouraged me to find a willing female to mate with to further his research. He wanted to ensure that my gifts would be passed on. This would provide his hypothesis that the digital DNA could be transferred to another generation. A new fear assaulted Noe's senses like an unstoppable disease.
Wait, what is he saying?
Janus said, he died before he could see the fruit of his labor come into this world. Yet she lives. A testament to the glorious future that evolved humans will share.
It can't be. I'm...
Suddenly, Janus and his knife disappeared. He reappeared with a blink in front of the levitating quantum computer, then said, "Yes, Noe, I am your biological father. You are evolved just as I am. No, probably even more so. There will be no limit to what you can do in the future." Noe felt lightheaded at the revelation.
Janus? My father? But, Dad, how?
Images of Victor came to her, cascading so quickly it almost caused her to faint.
It can't be true! Victor Acosta is my father!
She reasoned, wanting to believe this was another one of his manipulations, another part of his game. Janus scoffed.
A convenient fiction! A cover story concocted to conceal your true identity. That janitor could never have been your father.
The softening of her angry face let him know that the truth was beginning to take root.
Your mother knew what you were, but decided to let you choose your path. We agreed that if you chose Cereus, we would reveal your origins to you, but if you elected to live in the confines of the dying old world order, we would respect your wishes and let you live as one of them.
Noe shook her head, still distrusting.
Why didn't Mom tell me?
She said in a despondent tone.
Eventually, your mother grew tired of living in the shadows while aiding Cereus, and she walked out. For all her fire, she was still a woman of peace deep down, and hated to see innocent people slaughtered for the sake of evolution.
But you didn't care, Noe retorted.
The evolutionary process is impartial to the needs of Homo sapiens. It is a ruthless algorithm that preens and culls as it sees fit. I am following that same process. I just do it consciously, with foresight, and at an accelerated pace.
Damn it! She tried to move, but realized she couldn't.
No, I can't move after 5 minutes. Another rule.
She was really sick of playing Janus's game. If there were a board, she would have flipped it, and taken great pleasure in seeing the tiny pieces litter the floor.
You've locked me up again! Damn you, Janus!
Janus again continued as if she weren't there.
You want to know why I killed the woman that I loved? The woman that was also your mother? Because it was the only way for you to evolve, child. Your anger, your pain, isolation, loneliness, even your suicidal thoughts and ideations were spurred by her death. And alone you have surpassed them all, without even the faintest awareness of the power that lies like a slumbering titan within you. I am proud of you, my daughter. I truly am.
Janus eyed the quantum computer floating in space next to him. Now, it is time for you to claim your birthright and ascend with me to the next tier of evolution.
Ascend? What the hell is he talking about? Janus, don't do this. I don't want to evolve. I just want to be me and live my life. I don't want any part of this, nor does any other person on the planet.
Janus ignored her. She observed his eyes fluttering as if he had been possessed by a demonic entity. Then she saw the quantum computer come to life again. The steady cadence of its engine music was accompanied by a soft glow that ebbed from its interior. Without warning, a black download bar formed itself on the surface of the quantum computer's glass housing. Red numbers in digital font displayed themselves above the bar. Its progress was already at 25% and climbing. Noi struggled with every fiber of her will, but her muscles did not move. Janus watched her endeavor to escape with unsmiling eyes. Most humans spend their entire lives sweating and resisting as you do now. Yet the river of evolution flows eternally, unresponsive to their flailings. Eventually, after their strength and resolve fade, as it inevitably must, they succumb to its indomitable current and take their place in the grand order of things. Even I am subject to its whims. Endowed with the power to blast a new course for humanity's past in the Great Flow, I must answer fate's call. And you, my child, must do the same.
Janus, please, don't do this,
Noi pleaded. The process has already begun. As soon as you stopped my corporeal heart, I began to download my mind into your physical body. Soon my data and consciousness will be at one with yours. Then you will finish what I have started with the Great Filter. Then Noi saw the device of her nightmares. The glint of the small black cylinder with the rectangular head appeared in Janus's hand. The sight of the world-ending digital extermination device, dead, turned Noi's blood to ice. Another rule. Janus has a dead. There is the matter of your previous life and memories, my dear. I must clear space in your digital mind to make room for my digital self. Just relax. You won't feel a thing.
Chapter 66. Janus, Unbounded. The dead loomed before Noi's vision. The tiny object would erase her entire digital history. Videos, vital records, memories of her friends and family. Fyra. All would be cast into the virtual dustbin and perma-deleted, leaving her as a digital blank slate. Her physical form would go on remembering, but the world would not. It would be as if she had vanished from the face of the earth, her digital soul cast into the nothingness of cyberspace, the modern human manifestation of waking death. With somber eyes, Janus reassured her. This is what is best for you, what is best for our species. Perhaps with time, you will begin to understand. The flash from the head of the device was blinding in the blue space. For a moment, Noi lost the ability to perceive time. Throughout her Space Force training and in her own research, she had always wondered what digital death would feel like. Would it feel like anything at all? The image of her online second self, surrounded in a circle by tiny icons, came to mind. Each icon a logo, representing the websites, institutions, social media, and any other platform she used the network to interact with, hung in open space. Every icon represented a world, floating in slow orbit with her, Noelani Acosta, the center of the star system. The dead was a planet annihilator. Upon contact, the blinding light disintegrated every planetary body into microscopic fragments, then absorbed the fractured remains as if it were a cosmic vacuum cleaner. After the process was complete, nothing was left, except for a solitary Noe, standing in the blankness of her broken galaxy. A sun with no planets, awaiting heat death. Utter obliteration. Noe had not realized she had shut her eyes. The light from the dead had flashed, but she felt no different. Perhaps she would have to wait until she returned home to see its true effect? If I return home. She dismissed the thought from her mind and opened her eyes, forcing her attention back onto the progress bar and the ominous digital numbers suspended above it. 35%. Damn it, there's no time. Then she noted the look on Janus's face. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced by vexed confusion. He examined the dead with clinical detail, rotating his wrist to view it from all sides, searching for something. How can it not work now, of all moments? He said, real confusion in his voice. Noe observed the rounded curves of bewilderment on his face transform into the hard lines of apoplectic indignation. The girl, she has broken through somehow, Janus huffed. His manic, wide eyes flicked between the quantum computer and Noe. He considered his options carefully. Then in the next moment, he disappeared from her sight. Jinhua did something. She must have tampered with Janus's rules. Noe continued to struggle against her invisible bonds, which only had taken effect on her limbs, a fact she deduced because she was still able to breathe and blink. Jinhua, where are you? Noe looked helplessly toward the quantum computer humming on the desk. If only I could get to it. Maybe I could shut this whole thing down. Janus's voice echoed in her mind. If you destroy the simulation mid-download, your digital mind could crash, leaving you as a biological vegetable. Get out of my head! A biological vegetable? Could that really happen? Not to worry, child. It will be done soon. I will find your friend soon enough. Then we can proceed as I have planned. Think, Noe, think. I have to act without thinking or he'll know. Then it came to her. There was power inside of her, somewhere deep and buried. If what Janus said was true, she too had the ability to rewrite the rules of this simulation. But how to do it? She could barely move. Her muscles were stiff and unresponsive. She felt completely out of control. Gotta control what I can, no matter how small. She began to take a silent inventory of her body in search of something, anything she still had dominion over. Arms? No, jammed. Hands and fingers? Nope, locked. Legs? Frozen solid. Feet? No movement. Toes? She felt the tiniest nudge of movement, so small it was almost undetected by her own brain. Noe relaxed her facial muscles and focused on the progress bar to keep her thoughts off of her desired objective. If Janus read her mind, it was all over. 37%. If she could move her toes, then her foot might move too. No good. 39%. Damn it. Okay, try something else. She closed her eyes and concentrated, exhaling a deep, slow breath. To her surprise, her thumping heartbeat began to slow, and she felt slightly calmer. Again, she let air fill her stomach to its maximum capacity, feeling it expand under her protective vest. Every breath she took calmed her further, but she was still frozen in place. Panic almost forced her eyes to fly open, breaking her hard-fought concentration. But she worked to maintain the rhythm of her slow breathing, with full awareness that if her concentration faltered, she would have to begin the process from the beginning, and she didn't have that kind of time. From somewhere in the blue ether, Janus's voice sounded around her. Yes, I feel you calming down. Let evolution take its course. It won't hurt you. We are over halfway there.
50%. Over halfway there.
Hysteria from his words began to claw at her single-minded goal, like a hurricane lashing a tropical shore. It flung stinging rain and buffeted her with whipping gales. Trees snapped, power lines collapsed, roofs were ripped from the houses, yet Noe endured. Breathing in and out, she was a lone figure standing in the howling wind.
54%.
Why wasn't it working? She still could only move the sole toe, and time was running out. Noe could feel her anger begin to roll, causing her to sway in the intensifying gusts of distraction. The desire to unleash it was as tempting as taking a gulp of air after holding her breath for an extended amount of time. How much longer could she hold on? A woozy feeling overcame her. The red numbers over the progress bar began to blur and converge. It was increasingly difficult to maintain the rhythmic flow of her breathing. Then she heard a voice.
Noe? Noe?
It was familiar and small.
Noe, can you hear me? Wiggle your one toe if you can.
She followed the instructions of the soft voice.
Don't react. Just listen. I'm going to tunnel an encrypted TP comm to you so that Janus can't read your thoughts for a while. We have to activate it at the same time, though. Move your toe if you understand.
She made the gesture.
Okay, let's do it. 3, 2, 1.
We are at 61% and climbing. Just a little longer now and all will be settled. Janus's voice burst through her mind like a strong gust, threatening to extinguish her dying flame of focused calm. Noe had almost exhausted her willpower. Time and the pressure of the moment demanded her to open her eyes, to scream in frustration, to look Janus in the eye as he killed her, just as her mother most likely had done. The Category 5 tempest shook and rattled her. It would only be a matter of time before she fell to the ground and was carried off in the jet stream to join the other objects whooshing by overhead. The friendly voice returned.
It's okay. We can try again. Ready?
Noe gave the acknowledgement.
3, 2, 1, go!
Suddenly, a magenta light flashed, and she was transported out of her physical body. Wrapped in a pinkish-red aura, she was Q-Noe again, standing behind herself. She let out a tiny yelp of surprise as she saw her own body before her. Classic Noe stood arms locked at her side, face marred by blood, small cuts, hair greasy. She was a mess, but her face wore a tranquil expression. Her eyes were closed. The skin was smooth and loose. She looked as if she had fallen asleep during a gentle massage.
Don't worry, he can't hear us.
Jinhua appeared, standing right next to her. She was wrapped in the mysterious colored aura as well, as if a child had used a fresh highlighter to outline her body. Jinhua said breathlessly,
You did it! I've been trying to reach you since you shot Janus. I know it was hard for you, but you did it.
Noe nodded, appreciative of the acknowledgement.
I'm sorry I disappeared, Jinhua said with embarrassment. Once I saw that the quantum computer was linked to Janus's physical body, I immediately began to secretly dismantle and rewrite his code from within. I had to hide my signature from him, or he would have stopped me.
I got it, Noe said.
But how can we stop him? He's gonna download himself into me and then use my body to unleash his great filter. Feels disgusting even saying it.
Jinhua nodded firmly in agreement.
I know, ew, right?
Not helping, Noe retorted. Teenagers, ugh. Jinhua's face became serious again.
Noe, now that we know you're evolved too, you have the same abilities as Janus and I. That means with the two of us, we should be able to beat him somehow.
Noe gave an incredulous look, then shouldered her palms to Jinhua.
But I don't know how to shoot coded beams from my hands.
As far as I know, I don't have any special abilities. I just know how to fight and shoot, and my rifle won't work on a digital ghost. Jinhua produced a golden keycard from her pocket. It levitated over her open hand, glowing with lines of digital code circling around it. Here, take this. What is it? Noe asked. It will help you unlock your hidden potential. At least, that's what it did for me. Jinhua had sifted through Janus's code and found the precious object that she now extended to Noe. She hoped it would help them put a stop to Janus once and for all. Determination in her eyes, Noe reached for the card. Then, without warning, Jinhua and the card disappeared. I finally found you, Janus said. The seed of Lima, the girl with the special powers. You will not interfere with the genesis of humanity's next evolution. Janus had located Jinhua's physical form, picked her up by the neck, and began to squeeze. I'm choking. Jinhua was shocked with the strength of his grip. I have to do something. She opened her palm and began to delete the lines of code around him. Struggling in his firm grip, her shots were inaccurate. Hansa yellow streaks flew in all directions, and she wasn't sure if any hit Janus. Several of her misfired beams hit the blue space around him. They ripped holes in the blue screen and revealed the dilapidated 47th floor of the office tower. Jinhua caught glimpses of San Francisco's illuminated night skyline beyond the veil of the simulation. Then, to her surprise, she fell from his grip, coughing and gasping on her hands and knees. Her body felt the entirety of the events of the day. A heaviness had settled into her bones, as if her legs were leaden with sand. It would be difficult, if not impossible, to stop Janus in this condition. When she looked up, the code from his legs that she had unexpectedly deleted while thrashing in his grip was already rewriting itself as he stood again, undoing everything she had done, drawing them back into the blue arena, closing the window she had opened to reality. Jinhua stood to face him, and for a brief moment, they stared at one another in a final act of civility. The progress bar on the quantum computer read 80%, with the quantum computer floating in between them. Both the first of their kind, the last to forfeit victory. The stage was set for one and one alone to chart humanity's evolutionary destiny. You cannot defeat me so easily. I wanted you to live alongside Cereus and Limnic as one of the evolved humans, but if you insist on trammeling, I will erase you from existence. He shot a purple-colored jet from his hands. It narrowly missed her as she leapt to the side. Jinhua managed to fire back a freeze code, hitting Janus in the arm. He quickly undid her action and continued his assault. She evaded quickly, vanishing, then reappearing in evasive patterns. She returned fire as she moved. Indigo and goldenrod tones lit up the all-blue arena as she and Janus danced with opposing action. Over time, Janus began to anticipate her movements, then managed to trip her with a dummy line of code. Not long after she hit the ground, she felt the grip of his hand pulling her up by the hair, exposing the nape of her neck, where her implanted chip was located. Jinhua gasped. She was out of options and nearly out of time. 95%. The sound of shattering diverted her attention back toward the floating quantum computer. Classic Noe stood with rifle in hand, where she had delivered a decisive smashing to the very real, and now very broken, quantum computer with the butt of her rifle. The blue fabric of the arena began to fail, as Janus dropped Jinhua and looked at his daughter with horror. Around the three of them, Janus's simulation began flickering between the blue field and the reality of the 47th floor office. As the computer shut down, its mechanical heart silenced. The two realities switched so rapidly that they appeared as one, until the blue backdrop completely melted away, leaving the tattered old office with the starry San Francisco nightscape in the background. What have you done? Janus said. The color drained from his face. The same thing you did to my mother. While Classic Noi wrecked the remainder of the quantum computer, Q Noi appeared with the strange glow around her, standing behind her. In a series of quick movements, Q Noi drew the laser knife from behind her back, then thrust the weapon downward in Janus's direction. He moved to defend himself, but Jinhua had locked him in place. Q Noi teleported, then reappeared before Janus. As the laser knife moved downward, its beam grew longer and sharper, just before piercing Janus's body to deliver the killing blow. With the digital blade wound in his chest, a disquieted expression on his face, Janus collapsed to the floor. The projection of his physical form made no sound when it impacted the surface. Both Noi and Jinhua watched as their enemy crumbled into an unrecognizable collection of ones and zeros, vanishing into the nothingness of eternity, becoming another forgotten footnote in the history of humankind. Epilogue. 2 years later. Alone in Lee's study, Bartow stared up at the screens, lips pursed, hands on hips in anticipation. The man on the screen with his well-fitted black suit, white shirt, and power red tie looked like a leader. He would not look unnatural with one hand resting on a Bible, the other raised, calmly swearing to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States on a windy, cold January morning. This was the 8th time Bartow had listened to the man speak. His manner was professional, dignified. His words flowed with smooth forethought and practiced poise, saying all of the right things. But something about him seemed off, something that Bartow couldn't place. It wasn't his strategic haircut, the light that hit him just so to make him appear seasoned as opposed to old, or the flashing whiteness of his teeth. Those were all distractions, sure, but not the principal cause of his annoyance. After minutes of consideration, Bartow found his answer. It's definitely the way he says his R's. There's a weird breathiness to it that feels bizarre. It stands out whenever he speaks, like a faint whisper. Why does he talk like that? Bartow's thoughts began to run amok, like the Animaniacs bursting out of Warner Tower. He made no attempt to stop or oppose them, with conscious awareness that the absurd observation would affect his decision to vote for the man later in the year. The sound of the large oak door opening pulled his attention away from the wall of screens. Lee walked in, with his trusty small black briefcase in one hand. He wore an expertly tailored and sharply cut Italian black suit that was the right mix of stylishness and professionalism. Bartow was envious of the old man's ability to dress well, even in old age. It made him nostalgic for his youth, when he too cared about such things. Looking at Bartow standing below the screens, Lee wondered why he cared so much about this year's election coverage. To him, the picking of leaders had more or less always played out the same way since the beginning of organized human society. The candidate who was the best reflection of that society, in that moment, would lead the institution, for better or worse. This was not hard to see. What was difficult was making enduring change if the leadership was dissatisfactory. This usually required a reshuffling of societal priorities and values, or in extreme cases, it fell to the leader's people to fight and die for it, or at least be willing to wait for it. Only then, from among the common population, would a worthy leader emerge to match the true values of the organization. He believed this to be true for any long-standing institution. Nations were no different. I don't like this one, Bartow said, gesturing toward the wall of screens. Though his tone was casual, Lee knew he was attempting to fill the silence between them in his own awkward manner. Why not? Lee replied. Bartow shook his head. Same thing happens every 4 years. They pander to people who don't know or don't care about politics just to get votes, then quickly forget about everything they promised once, or rather, if they get elected. Lee nodded slowly, I hear that. A brief silence fell between the two men as they watched and listened to the candidate's speech from the speakers of the room. The Summer of More 64, that's what he's calling it. Perfect name for a campaign slogan. His marketing team must have worked hard on that one, Bartow said, shaky laughter following his words. You can hardly tell that he's a cyborg. Could you imagine? The first non-human president? Well, at least not fully human. I don't know if we're ready for that. Lee gave a half-hearted nod. In truth, he wasn't listening to Bartow or the screens anymore. His thoughts had drifted elsewhere. Then the speech ended. A roaring applause filled the room as the candidate smiled, shook hands with nearby onlookers, and posed with a face of forced trustworthiness. Some things are too difficult for those that are not human to replicate, Lee thought. The image of his daughter came to mind. I wonder how she's doing. Bartow immediately picked up on his distant eyes. The vacant state had become all too familiar in the last few months. He gave a terse voice command to silence the audio of the screens, leaving the post-speech commentary playing on the wall. He wanted to be able to follow it out of the corner of his eye. Bartow placed a hand on Lee's shoulder with practiced gentleness. I'm sure she's doing fine. She's always had a good head on her shoulders, and with her abilities, she sure won't have any problems making money. At least there's that. Lee gave a faint smile at the remark, but his eyes remained fixed on some distant object far away. Bartow could tell that his joke hadn't landed as intended. How'd it go at the Capitol today? Are we making any progress? Lee gave a slow nod. Some. It seems we've finally gotten away from the political fallout by Janus's Cereus and Limnic. He paused to collect his thoughts, rubbing his eyes from lack of adequate rest. But both organizations have been successfully dismantled as legal entities. Your new policies really helped with that. Are they truly gone? Lee thought, silently to himself. He wondered if the breaking of binding legal documents was enough to erase both organizations from the hearts and minds of people around the nation and world. He wanted to believe they were gone for good, but his instinct, always sharp and vigilant, made his doubt persist. Bartow gave a decisive nod of his head. I'm glad to hear that. He blew air out of his lips with an exaggerated sigh. It appears that society wasn't ready for Cereus' unique way of viewing the world, or a terrorist organization named after exploding lakes full of carbon dioxide, which is a shame because it truly needed it. Cereus, I mean. It still does. His voice trailed off, lost in reflection. The two men stood in silence again. Only the hum of machines filled the air between them in the large room. Bartow revived the conversation unexpectedly. Oh, I forgot to tell you. I received a message from Cheeks and Spazer the other day. Lee let a small snicker escape his lips. How are they? Good. Cheeks said it's almost the second anniversary of your shot to the gut, and he hopes you're not getting addicted to the healing augmentations. Lee grinned. I see. Bartow continued. He also said that their new private security venture, Bear Paw Solutions, is prospering. I guess they work mostly out of Auburn, patrolling Silas's SJ Arcade video game retirement business. A solemn expression drew itself onto Lee's face at the sound of Bear Paw Solutions. Bear's death in the tower 2 years ago thrust sour memories of Rodan to the front of his mind. It was a reminder of one of the greatest failures of his life, one he would live with for the rest of his days. I see, he said. I'm happy to hear they're well. We may have to visit them sometime. Bartow eyed him with a raised eyebrow. Just for a visit? Or to become a resident? Lee considered the question for a moment. Probably just a visit for now. I like my house. I see, Bartow said, disappointment in his voice. A deep quiet persisted for another minute. The post-speech coverage ended on the screens. Barto shut them down with a casual voice command. "Hey, what do you think that they'll do with their gifts?" "I mean, Noe and Jinhua," Barto asked. Lee shook his head. "I have no idea. It's up to them now." Barto slapped Lee's arm awkwardly. "You did the right thing in letting her go. You know, I remember when I went through the same thing with my son. You never feel like they're ready, or you're ready, but you have to let go at some point. I know it's a little different because of Jinhua's abilities and everything she's been through, but it's real similar." Barto closed his eyes, shaking his head. "It's hard to be a parent. It's hard to be human," Lee said. "I hear that, brother." This view is amazing. So peaceful. No wonder she liked it here. The view of Folsom Lake was as majestic and tranquil as ever, shimmering in the mid-afternoon sunlight. Noah's thoughts floated lazily through her mind as she reclined in the shaded breeze of the patio. The wicker lounger that her mother had owned for decades was surprisingly comfortable, especially with the fluffy silver cushion placed on it. The material helped cool her down in the blazing heat of the summer sun. In her orange tank top and white cut-off shorts, a soft lake breeze tickling her toes, she felt truly relaxed for the first time all week. Noe allowed her eyes to close in an attempt to quiet her hyperactive mind. Not long after, images of endless data began to flood her senses. She felt her heart begin to race out of control. Her breathing became shallow and labored. It was a feeling close to drowning, and it terrified her. "Noe! Noe!" Fyra's voice broke through the chaos of her thoughts, pulling her back to the tranquil space on the balcony. Noe's eyes fluttered open as she worked to calm herself, taking methodical deep breaths in and out. It was a skill that had saved her life that day in the tower, and one she counted on daily to maintain her sanity. Her digital best friend appeared before her. The anthropomorphic anime cat could literally be with her at all times now, having been given greater life by Noe's powers. Fyra stood beside Noe's recliner, with deep concern on her cartoonish face. "Nightmares again, huh?" Fyra said. Noe nodded, holding her head. "The visions, they just keep coming. It's like PTSD plus." Fyra moved around the recliner and placed her hands on Noe's shoulders. She began a rhythmic massage, kneading the tight muscles to soften them. Most would have found a massage from an AI assistant abnormal. For Noe, it was nothing special. The sensation made her body react as if it were on vacation. Any contact titillated the sensitive and hidden core of her being, heightening all feeling and awareness. Noe felt her body return to normal. As Fyra was squeezed and rubbed with the greatest of care, Noe thought about her power. Getting massages was one thing. Truly understanding and mastering them was something else entirely. "Your potential is limitless." Janus's words snaked through her mind, leaving a trail of molted thoughts in their path for her to discard, process, or ignore. His image, the image of her true father, was with her everywhere. Her waking thoughts, memory, and the depths of subconscious harbored vestiges of his words, face, and legacy. Noe had to fight to sweep the thoughts aside whenever she encountered them, a task she had become much better at in the previous 2 years. Today, her powers performed the ritual cleansing with efficiency. Then she laid back and let her headspace float, as if resting in a hyperbaric chamber. Her mind needed to rest from the endless energy running through it. Her eyelids slid closed again, allowing her a momentary rest. The moment would have been damn near perfect had it not been for the itching feeling somewhere just beyond her consciousness. What will we find there? Will we be able to get the answers that I need? Is Janus truly gone? The same questions had become permanent residents in her mind during her waking hours since that fateful evening 2 years ago. No amount of work, money, sex, or any other worldly distraction could keep them at bay for long. The sound of her device dispersed the questions from her thoughts. Startled, she felt Fyra's hand release their grip from her shoulders as she jolted herself up from her reclined position and sat up. "Answer," Noe said, giving a clear voice command.
Hey, it's Van."
Noe shook her head, allowing a smile to form on her naturally serious face. "What's up? Are we ready to go?" Suddenly she heard heavy rustling and shuffling on the other end of the call. What followed were a dull series of thuds and thumps, the sound of heavy objects hitting the ground. Noe scrambled to her feet, feeling slightly dizzy from standing up too fast. "Hey, is everything okay over there?"
"Ah, nuts. There goes the bags."
Van said with exasperation.
Knew I should have packed them in tighter.
There was a pause on the other end. Noe guessed he was looking around at the fallen luggage, probably confused at where to begin picking it up. She sighed heavily, suppressing a small laugh. His presence made her spirit light and helped to keep her from sinking too far into her own head. And he turned out to be a good driver, listener, and friend, despite spending years staring at wheels turning themselves and being a silent shepherd.
"I'm good. And, yeah, we'll be ready to go soon. Soon as I get all this stuff back in the van."
More shuffling and groaning followed.
"By the way, have you seen Jinhua? She should have been back by now."
Noah's face became serious again. "Haven't seen her today." Van grunted, struggling with what must have been a hefty piece of luggage.
"Can't you just do the mind link thing with her and, look where she's at? We should get on the road soon if we're going to make it there in 7 days."
Noe began to see the wave of signals floating through the air, a clear sign that she was losing control over her calm and was becoming annoyed. Van's reminder didn't help. "Yeah, got it. I'll go look for her."
"Cool. See you in a few."
The call went dead. Noe attempted to communicate with her telepathically, but had no luck reaching her. She must have cut her signal again. "Fyra, you got anything?" Noe asked. "I'm not seeing Jinhua's signature anywhere." Noe paused for a moment, thinking. "I think I know where she is." Fyra nodded with zeal. "Yep, she's probably at the usual place." Noe stretched her arms above her head in another effort to wake herself up. "I'll go get her." Jinhua stood ankles deep in murky water on the shores of Folsom Lake. In her jeans shorts and plain yellow t-shirt, her long black hair waved in a passing breeze. "I feel the wind, the sun, the heat, the breeze, everything." She allowed the physical sensations of her body to fill her mind, leaving no space for much else. She didn't want to meditate or enter the digital consciousness of the world. She only wanted to feel what it must be like to be fully and uniquely human for just a brief moment in time. Standing there on the shore, she allowed words from her morning reading to access the sanctum of her thoughts. The words came from a lengthy article that her father had authored some years ago. It was about the origin and history of Cereus. It detailed how it had come into existence, what its mission was, and why, like the flower it was named after, it was doomed to wither, then die, only after a few decades. Her father had written the following words. "Humanity constructs everything in its own image, hoping to ensure its everlasting presence in all things that it builds. With Cereus, the founders sought to build an eternal effigy in the hearts and minds of people. They hoped this construction would endure in the collective consciousness. In other words, they wanted us to evolve together for our mutual survival as a species." Jinhua thought about the word evolution. She knew now it was no coincidence that her father had named her after the Chinese action verb Jinhua to mean evolve. He had most likely hoped his and her mother's sacrifice would bring all of humanity one step closer to the ever-necessary goal of shedding the needy and unappeasable shell that binds it to hate, death, and destruction of self and its only planetary home. But had it been worth it in the end? Had her father, Barto, Janus, and the other founders really sparked a new phase of humanity? Or had Cereus just been one more undesirable trait that nature, or even fate, had snuffed out as part of its own great filter? Even with her ability to see and process the entirety of humanity's knowledge, she could find no answers. At least not any that she wanted to acknowledge or accept. Though she felt slightly better that she had erased any record of Janus, Limnic, or anything related to them from the annals of cyberspace, she knew he would live on. Not in physical or digital form, but in the nightmares of his victims, in the fears of every common old world citizen as a terrorist, and worst of all, in her head and heart as her evolutionary relative. This was just as he had intended. Janus knew that no matter how his role in history played out, his actions would seep into the public consciousness, like the devil, Brutus, or Adolf Hitler, granting him a form of immortality that some may achieve hints of with augmentations and current technology, but will never attain in spirit. This thought haunted her most of all. "There you are." Jinhua turned to see Noe standing on the path leading toward her mother's mansion. She approached Jinhua with slow steps, slight worry on her face. "It's like she's afraid of me sometimes, but I know she cares," Jinhua thought. "Everyone's looking for you," Noe said. Her voice was soft and even. "I know. I was planning to head back up to the house soon." Jinhua's eyes fell to the rocky sand-colored beach of the lake, fixing themselves on the place where the waterline lapped at a small circle of pea-sized rocks. "Hey, Noe, what is it? Do you think we'll get the answers we're looking for over on the East Coast?" Noe put a warm hand on Jinhua's shoulder. "I'm not really sure, but according to Barto, this guy studied Dr. AK's work extensively, and he knows his shit. If anybody can help us, it's him." Jinhua returned a weak smile, still unconvinced. "We tried figuring ourselves out on our own these last 2 years, but we hit a wall, and now this is our best option." Noe's eyes locked onto hers. "You'll see that this is gonna work. It has to." Jinhua didn't protest. She simply returned a small smile, saying nothing. She knew Noe was right. Barto's son might have the answers that they were looking for. She had to know how to really use her powers. She also wanted to know who the other evolved people were, in order to connect with them and not feel so alone. Even though both Cereus and Limnic had been politically dismantled, their legacies lived on, and radical Limnic fanatics were still out there, ready to kill the 2 women who delivered death to their leader. She thought of Daniel lying lifeless in the tower after their confrontation with Janus. Although he had been repaired in body, somehow their special bond had been broken, most likely by Janus. He was no longer her Daniel. Could somebody enter into her head and corrupt her too? The thought made Jinhua cold with fear. Noe knew what she was thinking. She's scared. Hell, I am too. We need this though. I don't know how much longer both of us can hold out. "Come here," Noe said. Both women embraced tightly, clinging to each other with mother-daughter strength and assurance. "We'll keep each other safe," Noe whispered. "I promise." In the safety of the hug, both opened their eyes, viewing distant objects. Noe saw the rippling currents of the lake. Jinhua caught a glimpse of the blazing and unrelenting sun out of the corner of her eye. There, in the protective clinch, Jinhua was reminded of the importance of human touch. In its heart-rending simplicity, it communicated a profound wordless message. I'm here for you. You are not alone. I love you. Her heart received Noah's message, her motherly intention to protect, without need of either of their special abilities or the limited expression of language. Standing there on the lake's edge, she thought about how much she had changed since becoming involved with Cereus and Limnic. She was no longer that competitive, science-obsessed girl from a weird commune city in Northern California. Before she was a collector of information, now she was an information processor. The neo-hunter-gatherer. Roving the plains of the digital frontier, she was somebody and something new. A being that not even she herself could understand. She had become an element of the future, rooted by human thoughts and desire. She was, from that moment forward, a student of and participant in history.